Meanwhile, China is working on a new project. Xi Jinping wants to be the man of peace. And no, this is not a change of heart. He just wants to score political points. And this is not peace for his neighbors. Xi Jinping wants to mediate in the Russia-Ukraine war. He's making a push for talks. China has gone into a diplomatic overdrive. Their president wants to speak to the leaders of Ukraine and Russia. Xi Jinping plans to speak to Zelensky virtually, and then he'll meet Vladimir Putin in person. And this dialogue could happen as soon as next week. Reports say the Chinese president will first travel to Moscow. There he will meet the Russian president, and after that he will call the Ukrainian president. This would be a first. Xi Jinping has not spoken to Volodymyr Zelensky since the war began last year. With the Russians, though, he's been in regular touch. So if the call with Zelensky happens, it will be significant. China will position itself as a mediator in the war. The question is why? What explains Xi Jinping's urgency? Perhaps the events in West Asia. Remember, he took credit for the truce between Saudi Arabia and Iran. China hosted the final round of peace talks. Even though other intermediaries were involved, China took all the credit. Beijing declared that it was the one that brokered the peace pact. Perhaps they want a repeat in Ukraine, and China stands to gain a lot with this. The idea is to present a new world order, one that is led by China instead of the West. At least that's the ambition. China is already pitching itself as the good guy and painting the West as the driver of the conflict.
Regrettably, efforts to persuade peace and promote talks have been consistently undermined. It seems there's an invisible hand pushing for the protraction and escalation of the conflict, using the Ukrainian crisis to serve certain geopolitical agendas.
The invisible hand, says the Chinese foreign minister. No prizes for guessing who he's talking about. The United States of America. China is suggesting that it can do a better job. And that's the first reason why it wants to mediate. Reason number two, China wants to seek leverage against the US. Remember, the US has been trying to contain China by slapping sanctions. It has been trying to move the global supply chains away from China. Beijing wants to stop this. It wants to stop the exodus of businesses, and ending the Ukraine war would give China an opening. An opportunity, basically, to stitch new alliances, to reboot ties with Europe, for instance. In fact, reports say when the Chinese president travels to Russia, he may make a few stops in Europe too. It will be quite something. A diplomatic comeback of sorts. After 3 years in a virtual lockdown, the Chinese president will be touring multiple countries. The plans are yet to be finalized, and the United States is watching closely. Washington is sending a message to the Chinese president about this upcoming visit to Moscow. Listen to what's being said. We have been encouraging President Xi, this is the US saying, we have been encouraging President Xi to reach out to President Zelensky because we believe the PRC and President Xi himself should hear directly the Ukrainian perspective and not just the Russian perspective on this. Earlier this year, China pushed a so-called peace plan for Ukraine, and Kiev was not even consulted about it, which is why the West has been skeptical about China's moves. But to say they're the ones encouraging China is a bit much. And the West may not agree to Xi Jinping's peace plan. It's very unlikely to fly. Then why would Xi Jinping still want to get involved in this? Because even an attempt to intervene could bring him good press, both at home and outside. You see, China's domestic troubles are mounting, and the Chinese have started blaming the West for it. The government has. This is all an attempt to build a new narrative. Look at Xi Jinping's recent speech. He uses words like containment, encirclement, suppression. All of it is to paint China as a victim and America as the perpetrator. And now this rivalry could play out in the battleground of Ukraine. Let's hope it doesn't make things worse. So Switzerland's neutrality is being tested, but the United Kingdom has no such problems. It is picking clear sides, especially in the fight against China. The UK is ramping up its military spending. It is arming allies, even deploying military assets in the region to take on China. Let me tell you how. We'll start with the UK's military budget. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has decided to expand it. Over the next 2 years, the UK will spend $6 billion more on defence. Where will the money go? Mostly to three areas. The UK will replenish its ammunition stocks, modernize its nuclear submarine program, and fund the next phase of AUKUS. That's the military alliance of Australia, the UK and the US, AUKUS, AUKUS.
The threats to our security have increased, and that's why we're investing £5 billion more in our world-beating armed forces over the next 2 years.
And which threats was Rishi Sunak talking about? Russia, certainly, but more importantly, China. The UK's foreign policy is witnessing a clear shift, and Sunak is taking a more hawkish stand against China. The plan is to counter the dragon in every theatre possible. I told you about the AUKUS. Yesterday, the alliance unveiled a new roadmap. The three partners will make nuclear submarines. The leaders met in San Diego in the US. They announced a new agreement. Australia is buying 3 nuclear submarines with an option to purchase 2 more in the future. Australia and the UK will design the new subs, and America will supply the technology. The submarines will be built in Barrow, England. And this is just one part of the alliance. They want to expand the agreement. They want to build artificial intelligence capabilities, hypersonic weapons, and other advanced technology. Where will these submarines operate? Again, Rishi Sunak had the answer.
This is a powerful partnership. For the first time ever, it will mean 3 fleets of submarines working together across both the Atlantic and Pacific, keeping our oceans free, open, and prosperous for decades to come.
The Atlantic and the Pacific. China wants to expand its sphere of influence in both these regions. AUKUS plans to counter that with submarines. But they will take time to build. Until then, the allies have come up with a stopgap arrangement. Both the UK and the US will send their submarines to Australia. They will serve in rotation at a naval base near Perth. A name has been given to this initiative. It will be called Submarine Rotational Force West. Needless to say, China is not thrilled about any of it.
The latest joint communique issued by the US, UK and Australia indicates the 3 countries have gone further and further down a wrong and dangerous road for their own selfish political gains, in complete disregard of the concerns of the international community.
Wrong and dangerous, that's how Beijing describes AUKUS. We wonder what China would say about this one. Britain working with Taiwan. Taipei is upgrading its naval forces and London wants to help. The UK is stepping up military exports to the island of Taiwan. It will send more submarine parts and technology. What kind of parts? We don't have a full list, but experts say these exports will improve Taiwan's defenses against China. So the trajectory is quite clear. The UK finally sees China as a threat, and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has no plans to strike a balance. He is leaving no opportunity to challenge China. In fact, he brought up the origins of the Wuhan virus too. The British Prime Minister was asked about the recent American assessments, the ones that claim that the virus could have come from a Chinese lab. Sunak said he does not rule out a lab leak himself. Let me quote, "There's clearly questions that need to be answered. I'd certainly say that. And we haven't ruled anything out at this stage. I think what we want to see and fully support is a proper scientific inquiry as to the origins, and we would urge everyone, including China, to cooperate with that investigation." China is not expected to relent on that front. But the message for Beijing is quite clear. It has no friend in the Sunak government. And why is Rishi Sunak taking such a tough stand now? It's hard to say. Perhaps to boost his approval ratings, or to avoid a diplomatic isolation, or both. Either way, it's a hard shift. We say better late than never. China is battling a new disease outbreak and talking about a fresh round of lockdowns. This time it's influenza. Official data says there are 400 cases, but we know a thing or two about how China maintains data, so discount that. The flu has been spreading for 6 weeks now. The positivity rate is over 40%, and pharmacies are set to be running out of medicines. This is almost a repeat of what China saw during the last wave of the Wuhan virus. And the prospect of another lockdown has caused a lot of anger. Citizens are pushing back as the world wonders what and how much the Chinese are hiding this time. Here's a report.
A familiar story is playing out in China. Another disease outbreak, a drug shortage, days of remote learning for children, and prospects of a lockdown. No, this isn't the Wuhan virus we're talking about, it's the influenza outbreak. China has been seeing a steady rise in cases of flu since February. On last count, China recorded 390 cases of flu. The positivity rate jumped from 41.6% from 25.1% in 1 week. But given Beijing's tendency of suppressing data, the real figure remains unclear. Influenza A, which is the common flu virus, is said to have been responsible for 99% of the flu cases detected in China. Its symptoms include fever, aches, headaches, and diarrhea. The WHO says the rise in infections is due to simultaneous transmission of two influenza A virus subtypes. One is the H1N1 and the other is H3N2. The flu, however, is reportedly seasonal. It's also been noticed in other countries. But in China's case, it's taking a toll on school-going children.
My child vomited twice yesterday. The child has had a fever of up to 40 degrees for several days. Today, the doctor will check whether he has influenza A.
The rise in flu cases comes weeks after China witnessed a deadly COVID wave. Millions are said to have died then. Doctors, however, have ruled out another wave of COVID infections. They say the rise is due to low immunity levels.
For school-age children, about 20% to 30% of them test positive for influenza A. The current situation does not seem to be another wave of COVID-19 infections.
Because school children have been taking online classes for a good part of the past 3 years, their existing immunity and antibody levels are relatively low. So when they return to school, they could be prone to infectious diseases such as influenza.
The latest outbreak has sent alarm bells ringing. Populous cities like Shanghai, Beijing, Tianjin, and Ningbo have switched to online classes for students. Some want to take it a step forward. Take Xi'an, for instance. It has a population of roughly 13 million. Officials have warned of a lockdown if things get out of hand. Municipal authorities in Xi'an last week presented a 4-level response system. This keeping in mind the severity of the situation. If the outbreak gets worse, authorities say they're prepared to enforce pandemic-style lockdowns to curb the infections. That's right, a lockdown for a flu outbreak. And it seems it has already taken the first step in this process. On Wednesday, it issued an emergency notice to local authorities. It permitted them to shut schools, businesses, and entertainment centers. But residents are having none of it. For them, it's a flashback to the nightmare they witnessed in 2021. You see, China's radical measures are no secret. In 2015, authorities in Shanghai had warned of stopping classes, work, and restricting gatherings in the event of an influenza outbreak. During the outbreak of the Wuhan virus too, China saw one of the strictest lockdowns in the world. This was in line with the country's zero-COVID policy. Citizens forcefully locked for days without access to daily essentials. The situation in Xi'an was no different. It suffered a draconian lockdown between December 2021 and January 2022. Many were left starving due to the lack of essentials, and medical services were affected for weeks together. But citizens lost patience after a point. After almost 2 years of strict lockdowns, large-scale protests were witnessed on the streets of China calling for an end to restrictions. China's zero-COVID approach had evidently failed.
I think we just need to identify the close contacts or semi-close contacts, those people who might have been infected. This is just enough. We don't need this huge screening of the whole compound. It's not necessary to be so meticulous.
Chinese social media websites are flooded with messages. Angry citizens are pleading to authorities not to go down that path again. They say that similar outbreaks have happened in the past and life has gone on. While there is no news of a complete lockdown, the distrust of the citizens in the local authorities remains high. They don't want to see a repeat of the pandemic restrictions.
And finally, it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Europe. Another migrant boat has capsized there. This one came from Libya. In the US, California is facing one weather event after another. Some parts of the state are facing floods. Rescue efforts are underway. Meanwhile, the East African country of Malawi is dealing with the aftermath of Cyclone Freddy. The British Arctic Survey has released footage of the A81 iceberg. It is as big as London. And finally, 2 Spanish engineers are working on the first private reusable rocket. We're leaving you with these images. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Copy, we got it. We got vision.
870 bridge, I see. Additionally, when you're ready to land later, I have a bridge LZ ready for you.
Confirm, no need for... All right. Coming down. There you go. Just keep this line.